Amara Bennett thought she was stepping into an opportunity of a lifetime. A prestigious school, a bright future, a place where hard work and intelligence mattered. But from the moment she walked through Crestwood Academy's doors, she realized the truth. She wasn't welcome, ignored, humiliated, and accused of things she didn't do. How much could she take before she fought back? This isn't just a story. It's a battle for justice. And trust me, you won't believe how it ends. As you watch Amara's journey unfold, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know. And if you love powerful stories like this, ones that challenge injustice and inspire change, hit that subscribe button and join us at Inspiring Stories Told. More eye-hearing stories are coming your way. You won't want to miss them. The wrought iron gates of Crestwood Academy loomed high above the sidewalk, gleaming under the morning sun. To most, they symbolized prestige, an invitation to academic excellence. But to Amara Bennett, they felt like the threshold to something much colder, something hostile, something that whispered, "You don't belong here." She inhaled sharply, gripping the straps of her backpack, willing herself to ignore the tightness in her chest. This was supposed to be a fresh start, a step toward her dreams. She had worked relentlessly to earn her place at one of the most elite preparatory schools in the state. Her mother had called it an opportunity. "Show them what brilliance looks like, baby," she had said that morning, squeezing Amara's shoulders with pride. But as she stepped through the entrance, the stares began almost instantly, cold, calculated, dismissive. A hush spread like ripples in a pond. Students whispered behind manicured hands, their eyes flicking toward her like she was some rare species disrupting their ecosystem. She's new. She's one of them. How'd she even get in here? The school's grand corridor stretched ahead, gleaming marble floors, walls adorned with plaques bearing the names of legacy students, Crestwood's Phineas. The weight of it all pressed down on her like a suffocating hand against her throat. Still, she straightened her spine, lifted her chin. They would not intimidate her. The classroom was pristine, books neatly arranged, the scent of fresh paper and ink thick in the air. A large window let in morning light that cast stark shadows over the high-backed leather chair behind the teacher's desk. Madeline Whitmore stood at the front, her posture rigid, calculated, her presence undeniably authoritative. She was the kind of teacher that demanded order, not by warmth or inspiration, but by intimidation disguised as intellectual superiority. Her piercing gaze swept the room as if measuring the worth of each student. "Welcome back, everyone," she said, her tone crisp. "And I see we have a new addition." She turned to Amara with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Amara Bennett, isn't it?" Amara nodded, forcing herself to match the woman's gaze. "Yes, ma'am." Miss Whitmore's lips pressed into something too thin to be welcoming. "Well, I certainly hope you can keep up with our standards here," she said smoothly, before moving on as if Amara's existence was an afterthought. The backhanded remark landed like a slap, but Amara swallowed the bitterness and took her seat near the middle of the classroom. The class discussion began, centered around a literary classic, To Kill a Mockingbird. Miss Whitmore paced slowly, gesturing with precision as she spoke. This novel, beyond its legal drama, is ultimately a reflection of human morality. Who can tell me about the central conflict? Hands shot up, but so did Amara's. Miss Whitmore's eyes scanned the room, passing over Amara entirely. "Yes, Charlotte," she called on a blonde girl in the front row. Charlotte fumbled through an answer, regurgitating the textbook's surface-level explanation. Miss Whitmore nodded in approval. Amara's hand remained raised. Another question was posed. Again, she was ignored. The realization sank in like a weight in her stomach. She saw her, she just refused to acknowledge her. Amara lowered her hand, fingers curling into a tight fist beneath the desk. Midway through the period, Amara saw an opening. Miss Whitmore had just finished discussing the moral dilemmas in the novel. Tentatively, she raised her hand once more. This time, Miss Whitmore let the silence stretch before sighing as if indulging a child. "Yes, Miss Bennett." Amara exhaled, steadying herself. I think the novel doesn't just reflect morality, it's an indictment of systemic racism. Atticus Finch's role in defending Tom Robinson isn't just about personal integrity. It exposes the biases that exist within. Miss Whitmore chuckled, cutting her off mid-sentence. My dear, let's not confuse classic literature with modern political narratives, she said, shaking her head. Perhaps in your previous school, critical thinking wasn't a priority. A sharp wave of laughter erupted from the students. Some chuckled under their breath, others smirked openly. Amara's heart pounded. She forced herself to remain still, though her fingernails bit into her palms beneath the desk. She had spent years honing her mind, sharpening her arguments. And now, in an instant, this woman was dismissing her as incapable. She swallowed hard, her throat burning with words she wanted to scream. But she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The cafeteria was bustling with energy, yet Amara felt like an island adrift in an ocean of white faces. She took a seat at the end of a table, but no one sat near her. No eye contact, no conversation. Her tray sat untouched as she overheard whispers from the next table. I mean, it's just facts. People like that are always playing the victim. She was trying way too hard in English today. God, imagine if she brings up slavery next. Laughter. The bitter taste of rage, mixed with helplessness, rose in her throat. She forced herself to eat, even though each bite felt like swallowing glass. She was about to leave when someone slid into the seat across from her, Elliot James. She had barely noticed him before, a quiet, unassuming student with dark brown hair and nervous eyes. He hesitated before speaking, as if he regretted his decision already. You should keep your head down, he said under his breath, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Amara frowned. Excuse me, Miss Whitmore, he clarified. She's not someone you want to challenge. It never ends well. Amara narrowed her eyes. Why? Because I'm not supposed to have an opinion? Elliot swallowed hard. I'm just saying, I've seen it before. She makes life hell for people who push back. She studied him carefully. There was no malice in his voice, just something resembling regret. She could feel her pulse in her ears, the heat rising to her cheeks. So what? I'm supposed to just sit there and take it? She challenged, her voice low but sharp. Elliot's gaze dropped to the table. I'm just warning you, he muttered. Then, as quickly as he had come, he stood and walked away, leaving Amara alone once more. She clenched her jaw, her nails digging into her palm again. Her stomach twisted, not in fear, but in pure, unrelenting defiance. She had worked too hard to be silenced now. As Amara walked out of the cafeteria, her steps were steady, but her mind was racing. This is only the beginning. She could feel it in the charged air, in the way Miss Whitmore had already set her sights on her. And if this school thought she would break easily, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because Amara Bennett didn't come here to be silent. She came to make them hear her. The next morning, Amara walked into Crestwood Academy with a renewed sense of purpose. Her sleepless night had been spent replaying every moment of her first day. The humiliation, the whispers, the silent warning from Elliot. She had two choices, shrink into the background like they wanted, or fight back. She chose the latter, but she didn't realize just how brutal the battle was about to become. From the moment Amara stepped into Miss Whitmore's classroom, she felt the silent looming threat in the air. The teacher barely looked at her as she handed back the previous day's assignment. Amara glanced down at her paper, a glaring red C scrawled across the top. Her stomach twisted. She had read the material inside and out, crafted every sentence with precision, cross-checked her sources, made sure her argument was solid. She knew her work was better than a C. She quickly flipped through the pages, scanning for comments. There they were, harsh, clipped criticisms. Lacks depth. Unclear argument. You need to improve your comprehension skills. She felt her face grow hot. Unclear argument? Lacks depth? The very thing she prided herself on? She looked up and saw Charlotte, one of the most vocal students in class, leaning over to whisper with her friend. Charlotte held up her paper, an A glowing on the top corner. Amara's blood ran cold. She had overheard Charlotte's rambling, disorganized response in class the day before. It had been nothing special, riddled with basic, surface-level observation, and yet she had an A? Ms. Whitmore turned to the class, a sharp, condescending smile on her face. Some of you, she said, her eyes flickering toward Amara, need to understand that academic excellence is not about passion alone. It requires proper discipline, clear thought, and the ability to approach a subject objectively. A soft murmur of laughter rippled through the room. Amara tightened her grip on her desk, the humiliation sinking into her bones. The next assault came swiftly, and this time it was meant to crush her completely. That afternoon, Miss Whitmore passed out a new set of essays, the final grade before the first progress report. Amara's breath hitched when she saw hers. An F. She stared at it, disoriented, the letters blurring. Beneath the grade was a single damning sentence. This essay is far beyond your usual capabilities. Plagiarism suspected. Her stomach plummeted. Her heart pounded in her ears as she shot her gaze up to Miss Whitmore, who stood at the front of the classroom, arms crossed, watching her. Amara's voice was tight when she spoke. I didn't plagiarize. Miss Whitmore's eyebrows lifted in mock surprise. Is that so? She said smoothly, her voice dripping with feigned innocence. It's just that the quality of your writing has drastically improved. Almost too much. The class erupted into murmurs, the whispers slicing through Amara's resolve like 1,000 paper cuts. That's what I thought. There's no way she wrote that herself. Knew it. The room was closing in on her. Amara stood, her legs shaking with rage, but her voice was clear. I wrote that essay myself, every single word. Miss Whitmore tilted her head, pretending to consider. Well, she mused, perhaps you'd like to prove that to Principal Grayson. The class went dead silent, and then came the final crushing blow. Miss Whitmore smirked. Unless, of course, she added, you'd rather admit the truth now and save yourself the embarrassment. A sharp, bitter laugh echoed from Charlotte's side of the room. The walls felt like they were closing in, but Amara lifted her chin. Let's go. If this school thought they could break her, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. Principal Walter Grayson sat behind his immaculate oak desk, his expression unreadable. Ms. Whitmore perched on the edge of her chair, playing the concerned educator role to perfection. I only brought this to your attention, she said, shaking her head, because I believe in preserving Crestwood's academic integrity. If we allow students to take shortcuts, we undermine our entire institution. Amara stared at her in disbelief. The way she said it, like she wasn't outright lying, made Amara's skin crawl. Sir, Amara said, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest. I didn't plagiarize. Principal Grayson steepled his fingers. Miss Bennett, he said, voice eerily calm, Crestwood prides itself on tradition, excellence, hard work. If you're struggling to adapt, perhaps this just isn't the right environment for you. Amara's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just about the essay. This was a warning. She was being told, loud and clear, that if she didn't conform, she wouldn't last here. She walked out of the office, her heart pounding, her hands curled into fists. She had never felt so alone in her life. By the time she stepped into class the next morning, the entire school knew. Her chair felt smaller, the walls closer, the air thicker with judgment, and Miss Whitmore was waiting. Class, she said, her voice smooth as glass. Let's return to our discussion on To Kill a Mockingbird. Amara sat up straighter. This was her chance. She raised her hand. Harper Lee's novel isn't just about morality. It's about systemic racism, the courtroom scene. Miss Bennett, Miss Whitmore interrupted, smiling tightly. Let's focus on literary themes, not personal agendas. A wave of laughter broke across the room. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Miss Whitmore turned back to the class, as if the conversation was over. Amara's blood boiled. She stood up. "You mean the themes you think are acceptable?" The room fell silent. Miss Whitmore froze, her smile faltering for the first time. Amara felt the fire rise inside her, the weight of every humiliation, every whisper, every smirk bearing down on her. "I think it's interesting," she said, her voice calm but deadly sharp, "that a book about racism makes you so uncomfortable." The silence turned razor sharp. Miss Whitmore's lips thinned. "Take your seat, Miss Bennett." Amara didn't move, because in that moment, she realized something. This wasn't about her failing to meet their standards. This was about her refusing to be controlled by them. She met Miss Whitmore's glare, her hands steady, her heart beating like a war drum in her chest. This battle was far from over. This was only the beginning. "What do you think about what just happened to Amara? How did you feel when Miss Whitmore humiliated her in front of the entire class and Principal Grayson dismissed her so easily? Imagine working twice as hard only to be told you don't belong just because of who you are." If you're angry, frustrated, or rooting for Amara, show your support by liking this video and commenting your thoughts below. Will Amara fight back, or will Crestwood silence her for good? Keep watching, because this battle is just getting started. Stay tuned for the next part. Amara had always believed in fairness. She had grown up believing that hard work and intelligence mattered, that no matter where she was, if she proved herself, she would be treated with respect. Crestwood Academy was determined to shatter that belief into dust. After the public humiliation in class, she knew Miss Whitmore wasn't done. She could see it in the teacher's eyes. A calculated cruelty, the way she lingered just a little too long when looking at her, as if savoring the moment. Amara thought she was prepared. She wasn't. The following week, Miss Whitmore announced a group presentation project, analyzing literary themes through different perspectives. Amara didn't get to choose her group. She was assigned to a team of 4 white students: Charlotte, Nathan, Sarah, and Adam. She had barely spoken to them, but she knew them well enough. Charlotte, the ringleader, was Miss Whitmore's favorite, blonde, privileged, and shamelessly dismissive of anyone she deemed beneath her. Nathan and Adam were followers, not outright hostile, but eager to go along with whatever kept them in good standing. And Sarah? Sarah was silent, avoiding Amara's eyes, looking as though she didn't want to be there any more than Amara did. From the start, it was clear Amara's ideas didn't matter. "Maybe we should analyze the book through a historical lens," Amara suggested. Charlotte wrinkled her nose. "I think we should just stick to the themes Miss Whitmore mentioned in class. No need to overcomplicate things." Nathan snickered, throwing a glance at Adam. "Yeah, let's not make this political." Amara clenched her jaw. Political. That was their way of silencing her, of dismissing any perspective they didn't want to acknowledge. "I'm not making it political," she said carefully. "I'm saying the book's themes have real-world implications. If we ignore that, we're missing the point." Charlotte sighed, exchanging a glance with the boys. "Look, we've already got an outline. Maybe you can just proofread it." Proofread, like she was the assistant to their brilliant minds, like she was lucky to be included at all. Amara felt the sting of betrayal settle deep in her bones. She realized in that moment that it didn't matter what she did or how smart she was, they would always find a way to push her aside. The tension in the classroom was thick when presentation day arrived. Amara had worked tirelessly on her section of the project. Even though her group barely acknowledged her, she refused to let them dictate her performance. She was ready. Or so she thought. As Charlotte set up the slides, Amara's stomach dropped. Her notes were missing. Not misplaced, gone. She flipped through her notebook, checked her bag, her pockets. Nothing. Her fingers turned ice cold. She had reviewed them last night. She knew she had them. Her heart slammed in her chest. This wasn't a mistake. She looked up at Charlotte, whose smirk was barely concealed as she whispered something to Nathan. Miss Whitmore's voice broke through the panic. "Let's begin." Charlotte and the others went first, breathing through their slides. And when it was Amara's turn, She stood frozen. Her mind raced. The words blurred. She had nothing to reference, nothing to guide her. She opened her mouth to speak, but her thoughts tangled, her words fumbled. The class shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. A few smirked, some whispering behind their hands. Amara could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her, crushing the air from her lungs. Miss Whitmore sighed loudly, as if the scene before her was exactly what she expected. "Perhaps next time, Miss Bennett, you should come prepared instead of looking for excuses." The class erupted into laughter. Amara felt physically ill. She stood there, exposed, humiliated, broken open for everyone to see, her reputation destroyed. She made it through the rest of the day on autopilot, her body moving while her mind replayed the disaster over and over. She should have fought back. She should have demanded her notes be found, accused Charlotte of sabotage. But she hadn't. And Miss Whitmore? She wasn't finished yet. At the end of the day, Amara had just finished packing her bag when Miss Whitmore's voice rang out across the classroom. "Miss Bennett, stay behind." Amara's stomach dropped. She turned to see Miss Whitmore standing by the desk, her expression cold, calculating. As the last of the students filed out, the teacher folded her arms. "I won't tolerate disrespect in my class," she said smoothly. Amara blinked. "Excuse me?" Miss Whitmore tilted her head, feigning disappointment. "Earlier today your attitude was unacceptable. You spoke to me aggressively. I can't allow that kind of behavior to go unchecked." The world tilted. "I didn't do anything," Amara said, her voice quiet but sharp. Miss Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying I'm lying?" A slow, creeping dread clawed at Amara's chest. She was framing her. "You'll have detention for the next 3 days," Miss Whitmore continued. "Consider it an opportunity to reflect on your conduct." A smile curled at the edges of her lips, as if she knew exactly what she was doing. The detention room was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Amara sat at the desk, staring at the tabletop, her hands clenched into fists. Her throat was tight, her vision blurred with unshed tears. They were trying to break her, and for the first time since coming to Crestwood, she felt like they were winning. The humiliation, the accusations, the isolation. It was too much. She had fought so hard, tried to stand tall, but it didn't matter. They had all the power. She was alone. Her shoulders shook with the force of holding it all in, the weight of it pressing down, suffocating. She had always been strong. She had always pushed through. But today she felt weak. Her breath hitched, a silent sob escaping. She squeezed her eyes shut, desperate to push the pain away. And then she heard her mother's voice in her head. "Show them what brilliance looks like, baby." Amara's eyes snapped open. The tears stopped. A new kind of fire ignited in her chest. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, her body still shaking, but not from despair. From anger, from determination. She sat up straighter, exhaling a deep, steadying breath. They thought they could silence her. They thought they could break her down, make her disappear. They were wrong. Because Amara Bennett wasn't going anywhere, and she was done playing by their rules. The next morning, Crestwood Academy wasn't prepared for what was coming. The school's pristine hallways, usually filled with whispers of privilege and superiority, felt different, as if the air itself knew something monumental was about to happen. Students and teachers alike paused mid-step, their conversations cut short, when the front door swung open and a distinguished black man in a sharp navy suit strode in. Marcus Bennett, renowned civil rights attorney, and most importantly, Amara's father. Amara had never seen a room go silent so fast. As she walked in beside her father, she felt it, the shift in the atmosphere, the way heads turned, eyes widened, backs stiffened. Whispers rippled like a current through the halls. "Who is that? Wait, is that Amara's dad? Oh my God, he's a lawyer. Crap, someone's in trouble." She kept her head high, her father's presence a steady force beside her. Miss Whitmore had played her games. She had humiliated her, belittled her, tried to destroy her confidence. But today, the game was over. Miss Whitmore sat behind her desk, her usual cold, smug confidence intact. She barely spared Amara a glance before fixing her thin, artificial smile on Marcus Bennett. "Ah, Mr. Bennett, I presume," she said, rising to shake his hand. Marcus didn't take it. Instead, he calmly pulled out a leather-bound notebook, flipped it open, and leveled his piercing gaze at her. "I assume you know why we're here," he said smoothly, his voice calm but deadly sharp. Miss Whitmore chuckled lightly, waving a dismissive hand. "Mr. Bennett, I appreciate your concern for Amara, but we have strict academic standards here at Crestwood. I fear your daughter has been struggling to—" "Stop," Marcus cut in. The air snapped with tension. Miss Whitmore blinked, momentarily stunned. Amara had never seen anyone silence her like that. Marcus leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "You and I both know this isn't about academics. This is about your deliberate mistreatment of my daughter. So let's not waste time with pleasantries." Miss Whitmore's smile froze on her face, but she recovered quickly, crossing her arms. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice syrupy with condescension, "I understand you may be upset, but I assure you, Amara has been treated no differently than any other student. If she's had difficulties—" "You mean difficulties like being publicly humiliated," Marcus cut in again, flipping a page in his notebook. "Like being falsely accused of plagiarism, being given failing grades despite outperforming her peers, being ridiculed in class for bringing up race in a book about racial injustice?" Miss Whitmore's smirk faltered. "These are serious accusations," she said, shifting in her seat. "If you're suggesting I am stating facts, and I have proof." The door swung open just then. Principal Walter Grayson entered, his expression set in stone, his suit pristine and unbothered. Amara's stomach tightened. She knew what was coming. Grayson was here to protect the school, to defend Miss Whitmore, to shut down whatever argument her father had prepared. "Mr. Bennett," Principal Grayson said smoothly, "I hope we can resolve this situation in a civil manner. Crestwood Academy has an outstanding reputation, and we take all concerns very seriously." Marcus leaned back in his chair, completely composed. "Good," he said, flipping to the next page in his notebook. "Then I assume you'll take this evidence seriously as well." Miss Whitmore shifted uncomfortably. Grayson's brow furrowed. "Evidence?" Marcus pulled out a small flash drive and set it on the desk. "Testimonies from other students who have been mistreated under Miss Whitmore," he said smoothly. "Written statements, emails, and, most importantly—" His eyes flicked to the door. A moment later, Elliot James stepped inside. Miss Whitmore's face went ghost white. Amara's breath caught. Elliot looked nervous, but he stood tall. "I have recordings," he said, holding up his phone, "of Miss Whitmore targeting students of color, dismissing their ideas, mocking Amara." The room went still. Grayson's jaw tightened. Miss Whitmore's hands clenched into fists. Marcus tilted his head, a small, knowing smile playing at the edges of his lips. "So," he said, tapping the flash drive, "would you like to continue talking about Crestwood's outstanding reputation?" It happened faster than Amara expected. Within minutes, the school board was called in. The evidence was reviewed, and just like that, Miss Whitmore's empire crumbled. The board members, wealthy, composed, untouchable, couldn't ignore the facts. Miss Whitmore tried to argue, tried to deny it, tried to spin the narrative, but the recordings didn't lie. Neither did the students who came forward. By the time the decision was made, her fate was sealed. "We can't overlook this," one board member said gravely. Another nodded. "Miss Whitmore, your conduct violates the values of Crestwood Academy. Effective immediately." She was fired on the spot. By the time the news spread, the entire school was watching. Students gathered in clusters, whispering, laughing, staring in shock as Miss Whitmore stormed through the halls, her face pale with humiliation. Amara stood in the crowd, watching as her former teacher shoved past students, clutching her bag like it was the last thing holding her together. She paused briefly when she saw Amara. And for the first time, there was no condescension, no smug superiority, only fear. Amara met her gaze head-on, unblinking. Miss Whitmore swallowed hard and walked away. The doors slammed behind her. The school erupted. Some students cheered, others whispered. And Amara? She simply breathed. For the first time since stepping into Crestwood, she felt like she could finally breathe. Elliot stepped beside her. "She's really gone." Amara exhaled, a slow, steady smile curling her lips. "Yeah," she said, "she is." But deep down, she knew this wasn't just about her. It was about every student after her. And thanks to her fight, her voice, her refusal to be silenced, Crestwood would never be the same again. For the first time since stepping foot into Crestwood Academy, Amara walked through the halls without the weight of fear pressing down on her shoulders. There were no more hushed whispers questioning her place, no more dismissive looks from Miss Whitmore, no more knowing smirks from students who had reveled in her suffering. Instead, there was something new in the air. Respect. She didn't expect the applause when she entered the hallway that morning. It started as a slow clap somewhere behind her, then another and another. Before she could fully process it, the sound grew louder, spreading down the corridor, as students, even ones she barely knew, stood, watching her with something that looked like admiration. For weeks she had been mocked. Now she was being celebrated. She spotted Elliot pushing through the crowd, his expression tense with guilt. "Amara," he said, stopping in front of her. He looked awkward, hesitant, ashamed. She folded her arms, watching him. "I should have said something sooner," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "I saw everything. I knew it was wrong. I didn't know how to stop it." Amara studied him for a long moment. She could still remember how he had warned her that challenging Miss Whitmore wouldn't end well, how he had watched in silence while she endured every insult, every humiliation. But then she thought about what he did do. He recorded her. He stood in that office. He chose, finally, to be on the right side. "You spoke up when it mattered," she said softly. Elliot looked relieved, but also humbled. "I'll do better next time," he promised. She nodded. "We all will." The very foundation of Crestwood Academy was shaken by what had happened. Miss Whitmore wasn't just gone. She was a warning. For the first time, students, parents, and even the school board were forced to confront what had been allowed to fester in their halls for years. Days after her firing, the school released an official statement condemning discrimination, vowing to do better. But words weren't enough. They needed action. And change came fast. Mandatory diversity training was introduced for all faculty. No teacher would be able to hide behind their biases again. A review of biased grading practices was implemented, ensuring every student, regardless of race, was given a fair evaluation. Anonymous student complaint procedures were launched. No one would be silenced again. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't going to fix everything overnight, but it was a start. And Amara knew that sometimes a start was all you needed to create a revolution. As Amara sat alone in the school's courtyard that afternoon, she let herself breathe. The sun was warm against her skin. For weeks, she had felt like she was drowning, like no matter how hard she fought, the current would always pull her under. But now, she had broken the surface. Her hands rested on the open pages of her notebook, the words she had written just hours earlier staring back at her. "I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for every student who will come after me, because this wasn't just her victory. This was for every student who had been ignored, dismissed, silenced. For the ones who had been told they weren't good enough, that they were too loud, too different, too much. For the ones who had learned to shrink themselves to fit into spaces that were never meant to include them." She thought about her mother's words. "Show them what brilliance looks like, baby." And she had. She had shown them. She had stood against one of the most powerful figures at Crestwood, endured every attempt to tear her down, and won. And as she closed her notebook and looked toward the future, she knew one thing for certain. She would never stop fighting, not for herself, not for them, not for anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Because she did, and no one would ever take that from her again. Amara's story isn't just about one girl standing up against injustice. It's about all of us. It's about the battles we face every day, in classrooms, workplaces, communities, and beyond. It's about the moments when we are pushed down, silenced, ignored, and the choice we have to make. Do we accept it, or do we stand up and fight back? Amara chose to fight, and she won. But let's be real. This isn't just fiction. Stories like Amara's happen in real life, every single day. Students across the world face discrimination, unfair treatment, and systemic biases in ways big and small. They are told they are less than, that their ideas aren't valid, that their voices don't matter. But they do. This is why stories like this matter. Because speaking up creates change. Because change starts with one voice. But it doesn't end there. Think about it. What would have happened if Amara had stayed quiet? If she had let Miss Whitmore's abuse continue? She would have been just another student who was beaten down by a broken system. But instead, she became a symbol of resistance, a force that couldn't be ignored. And the best part? She didn't just fight for herself. She fought for every student after her. That's the real lesson here. It's not just about standing up for yourself. It's about standing up for others. It's about recognizing injustice, even when it's not happening to you, and having the courage to speak out. It's about breaking the cycle so that the ones who come after us don't have to fight the same battles. So now, let me ask you, what would you have done in Amara's place? Would you have spoken up? Would you have stood beside her? Or would you have stayed silent, afraid of the consequences? The truth is, we all have a choice to make, and in the real world, silence is complicity. When we ignore injustice, we let it win. But when we stand up, when we use our voices, when we refuse to back down, we change the world. And that's why this video matters, because this isn't just Amara's fight, it's our fight. If you believe in justice, fairness, and standing up for what's right, now is the time to show it. Amara's fight is bigger than just one person. It's a fight for everyone who refuses to be silenced. Show your support by liking this video, standing with Amara and those who dare to speak out. Have you ever witnessed injustice? Share your story in the comments below. We want to hear from you. And if you want more powerful stories like this one, hit that subscribe button and join us, because together we can change the narrative. This is just the beginning. More stories are coming. More voices need to be heard. So stay with us, because together we can change the narrative. The fight isn't over. It never is. But neither is our will to fight.